I gotta say, I'm having trouble getting myself all fired up for today's show because I recorded an episode with the good folks over at the Menace Podmen show earlier today where we did a Pop-Tart draft. It's not airing until next week, but I put all of my gusto into that. I got no gusto left. By the way, that was like the most fun I've ever had recording a podcast. So please stay tuned for that over on their feed. This is Old Man Squad Fantasy Basketball. I'm Dan Bespris. You can find me on social media at Dan Bespris, DanBesbris, or you can follow the network at Old Man Squad. Please take a moment here at the front end of the show where many of you get to before you give up on me to like, rate, and subscribe. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the thumbs up button. No matter where you're taking in the show, please hit that subscribe button. And also, if you are listening after the fact where you can do a 5-star review, I would be forever grateful. Today, we are double dipping again. After yesterday, we took a little brief detour away from team previews to do some top 12 stuff. I thought it might be kind of fun. I don't know. Maybe you guys didn't. It's not super helpful at this time of year, but I thought it'd be entertaining. And so that was kind of the target there. Today, we veer back away from entertainment and back into the cold, dry team preview slog. I kid? I sort of kid. And we finish up the Western Conference today. We'll do the San Antonio Spurs, then we'll move east and work on the Miami Heat. Without further ado, the San Antonio Spurs, who have maybe the most talked about player in basketball, and that, of course, is Victor Wembanyama, who finished last year as number 6 in 9 category leagues. Down the stretch, he was much better than that, and I find it's kind of illuminating to go second half of the season in how we look at the numbers here. He was number 5 in the second half. He was number 2 over the last 20 some odd games of the season. And obviously a player very much that, first of all, came into the league and made an immediate impact right out of the chute, but also on the rise, especially as the season went on when they, again, took the restrictor plates off, let him play 32, 33 minutes a ball game. He was a frickin' wrecking crew. During those final 20 to 25 games of the year, Wemby, and this is what folks on YouTube are seeing on their screen right now, averaged 23.5 points, 2.3 3-pointers, 12 boards, 5.3 assists, 1.5 steals, 4.5 blocks on 45% shooting from the field and 77% at the free throw line with 4 turnovers. During that stretch, making him the number 2 player in 9 category leagues. I don't want to spend too much time on Wemby on the show because he's going to go 1 or 2 or maybe at latest 3 in basically every single fantasy draft this year. But I would just, and I mentioned this on yesterday's show when I was talking about why I thought Nikola Jokic would finish number 1, or frankly, why I would just sort of prefer to have Nikola Jokic. And it comes down to that sort of, to call Wemby a 1 category monster is not really fair because he's also excellent at steals. He scores a decent amount. His rebounds are terrific. And, he's good at hitting threes. He's good at assists. Not hyper elite, but good at these things. So he's not a one-trick pony. But if you sort of strip away the things that are merely good or slightly better than that, you're left with rebounds, which is excellent at 12. And you're left with blocks, which is, pace-setting level so far above everybody else in the NBA that he can, as we mentioned yesterday, kind of win that category by himself when you consider the fact that you'll have 12 other guys that you're sort of lumping into your club. He does not become a particularly well-rounded top 3 fantasy player. And I would say the same thing about Anthony Davis, who was also right at the very tip top of the board. He was number 4 last year on the season. He's also not a super well-rounded fantasy player. Maybe a tiny bit more well-rounded than Wembanyama because AD was a positive in both percentages, not a big negative in turnovers, and kind of did a lot of the other stuff without hitting the 3-pointers that Wemby did. But even still, the more I play fantasy basketball, And you guys know I'm more of a roto guy than a head-to-head, but I have to try to steer the conversations on these shows to be able to accommodate both. And like I very much get the appeal. There was a comment on yesterday's show about how I was like talking about how Wembanyama is not going to improve, which is the opposite of what I said on yesterday's show. I don't know how that was misconstrued. This is a second year generational, like once in a lifetime kind of thing. Like he's an alien. And so obviously he's not going to be the same player this coming season as last year. But as things stood at the very end of last season, when you kind of figure that players start to make a little bit of that step forward, the steps forward for Wemby were more about just being more willing to have usage, more passing, more threes, more time on the floor, meant more blocks, meant more steals. But the efficiency didn't change at all over the course of the year. He was basically the same player from day one that he was at game 82, in that he reliably shot 45 to 47-ish% all season long, and free throw was a small negative as well. These are numbers that could definitely trend in the right direction, but I think expecting them to just both take a big leap may be putting too many eggs in that basket. So we have to handicap Wembanyama this year as if there are small incremental gains in efficiency stuff, along with just getting to do more. That's the part that I think we can assume is definitely going to happen. Victor is going to do more things as he adds 10 to 15 pounds of muscle and just, has a year of NBA basketball under his belt. And the Spurs are going to be trying to win a little bit more this coming season than last year. The expectation is Wemby's going to get a lot of shots. He took 18 down the stretch last year. There's every reason to think that number, or maybe even a tiny bit more, continues for him. So you'll get probably more points and probably more threes and probably maybe more assists. I don't know. That's a little bit contingent on another player we're going to talk about in a minute, old man Chris Paul, of course. But just more Wemby means more stuff. But of course, more Wemby, at least as it stood at the end of last year, meant a larger negative in 3 categories also: field goal percent, free throw percent, and turnovers. The good outweighed the bad. Like, obviously by a long shot, because this is a top 3 fantasy player. I'm mostly talking about, like, what was the difference between Wemby the first 4 months and the final 2 is he played like 3 minutes more per game. And yes, his negative impact in field goal and free throw and turnovers got bigger, but his positive impact in points, threes, rebounds, assists, steals, and blocks got bigger faster. So more Wemby was obviously a good thing. The one thing I'm not certain of on Wembanyama is whether the minutes do actually get higher than like 32 and change per ball game. Because I do think, one of the big things is keeping him healthy and upright most of the season, which they basically did this last year. He was pretty damn healthy his rookie season. And some of that was because they kind of held his minutes in check. So I don't know that it's going to be like Victor playing 35 minutes a ball game. I think 32, 33, 34 is a much more reasonable target. And he was basically already out there for that amount of time down the stretch last year. In fact, we could probably even look at the last month instead of the last 2 months, where he was playing 33 and a half minutes per game. And it took 20 shots per game. That seems repeatable, actually. But he was also at 5 turnovers a game. Heaven forbid you're playing 9 category leagues. And then the field goal percent was a pretty good sized negative. The free throw was a decent sized negative. And you got these massive rebound and steal and block numbers and solid points and threes and assist numbers. And so all that other stuff, you were like, honest to God, I don't really care because this guy's insane. But then you have to start thinking about team build going into this coming season. I promise we'll move through the other players a little faster, but Victor is such a unique and a crazy monster that we're looking at right now that we got to talk this thing through. If you're playing head to head, and this is, again, sort of a snippet of what we talked about for a bit on yesterday's show, and you draft Victor Wembanyama, you should assume you're getting probably a small positive in points. But if you're drafting him at the very top of the board, much the way the case has been for Nikola Jokic lately, you're probably not going to get as many points as the other guys going at the top of the board. And maybe you do. Maybe he gets up to 27, 28. But I think that would take a bump in efficiency that I don't know that we can guarantee. We can kind of hope, but I don't know if we can guarantee. There's, I think, probably a hope that Chris Paul helps with that a little bit. So do you want to start? Let's say you're debating between Wemby and Jokic with your first overall pick. Do you want to start with these two guys are pretty damn close in scoring? Wemby's going to beat him in threes, but he's not a big positive there. So basically, do you want to start with a guy who's a positive in rebounds and blocks, like a foundational positive? Or do you want to start with a guy who's a foundational positive in rebounds, assists, and field goal percent? That's kind of what it comes down to, because the other stuff you're gonna fill in the gaps. You know, you're gonna get a scorer for either to complement either Wembanyama or Jokic, because you're passing over Embiid, you're passing over Shea. Those are the guys that are gonna put up, and Luka. Those are the guys that are gonna get you 30 points per game at the front of the board. These guys probably are not. You're gonna supplement your threes or punt them if it's Jokic. For Wemby, you're going to supplement the assists. For Jokic, you don't really have to as much. For Wemby, you're going to have to try to paper over the bad percentages. For Jokic, you're going to want to get some blocks, or maybe you end up punting that also. So there's like these different paths you can take. There isn't a perfect yes or no, right or wrong answer to this stuff. Wemby's going to probably be a top 3 player in fantasy basketball in basically every single format this coming season. And it just sort of depends how much you want to put into the blocks category, because as we talked about yesterday, of all the players at the very top of the draft board, Victor Wembanyama is the only one where if you punt his best category, he falls out of the first round. What that tells you is there isn't a high enough floor on the other stuff. I mean, it's such a stupid thing to say about Wembanyama because he's insane and he's amazing and he's going to be a player that we all just want to watch every game forever. But you take away Embiid's free throw, he falls to the middle of the first round. You take away Jokic and his field goal percent or rebounds, he stays right at the top of the board. Luka, you take away, was Luka's best scoring, he stays near the top of the board. Wemby's the only guy on that list of guys going near the top where if you remove the best single one category, he falls like 2.5 rounds. And it's blocks. And that's okay. We need to include them in our analysis of him, unless you're punting blocks, in which case you're not drafting Wemby anyway, or you got someone else, and so you did it. Like if you draft Wembanyama, you're obviously not punting blocks. So it's part of the equation. You have to consider what he does there. But is there sort of like an upper limit to how much you could even want from one guy in one category? Would it be better for Wembanyama to block 3 shots a game instead of 4.5, but also have, I don't know, a medium positive in one of the 2 percentages? For me, the answer is yes. I would say especially for Roto, but I think for both. He's such a fun and unique player to think about right now. And now I've done 12 minutes on Victor Wembanyama, and we have basically 2 whole teams we got to go through here. Let's talk about the rest of the Spurs. Devin Vassell this last year over the, I want to do stretch run style. Oops, did I let this sit for too long and it went idle? Womp womp. I wish Basketball Monster, love that website, use it for basically everything, but I sure wish that it wouldn't go to sleep if you don't navigate every like 8 or 9 minutes. Looking down the stretch this last year, Devin Vassell, final 2 months. Let's do second half, actually. We'll do second half analysis. Vassell was number 61, taking 17 shots a ball game, 21 points, 4 boards, 5 assists, a steal, half a block, 2.5 3-pointers, 49 from the field, 79 at the free throw line. So very small negatives in both percentage categories, not as certainly as large an impact as the negative impact that Wembanyama was having in field goal percent. But by all accounts, Devin Vassell was basically right around his ADP. He was drafted near 60. He finished near 60. And by all accounts, he should probably be somewhat close to that again. He's their team's second best offensive player. You could potentially even argue he's the team's best offensive player, at least was this last year. So he'll be the guy behind Victor getting the next most shots on the team. And I feel pretty comfortable drafting Devin Vassell probably in the 60s or 70s again. That's fair. It's easy. I think this team's going to be more competitive. I would hope that he makes it through the season. The only other Spur this last year that beat the top 100 was Trey Jones in the second half. And again, we're looking at just the last 3 months of the year because they weren't playing Trey Jones the first half of the season. They insisted, the Spurs did, on pre-tanking by rocking Sohan at the point guard spot for the first half of the year, and it was a dumpster fire. But they got a point guard in there. They got Trey Jones in there. He ended up putting up exactly top 100 value on 11 points, 7 assists, 1.2 steals, minimal shooting of any kind, but good percentages on super low volume. And so that gave him some nice little roto appeal, a little bit of head-to-head appeal as well, because you got those 7 assists. Not talked about enough, by the way, is that Trey Jones had almost a 5-to-1 assist-to-turnover ratio. And guess what? Dude is freaking doomed this year because Chris Paul is a San Antonio Spur, and he's come in there, and the talking points for the Chris Paul addition was, he bought into what the Spurs are doing, meaning Chris Paul is less concerned about winning a championship, more concerned about making a few bucks and training some young dudes. And then depending on how the team's takeoff, ascent arc looks, he can either try to wiggle his way to another team, maybe next year, or stick it out and help with the growth of a very young basketball team, getting to play now with the world's next big thing, literally the biggest thing. When the signing went down on Chris Paul, I immediately did a podcast talking about what I thought he might do this coming season. And I think it's pretty convoluted, honestly, because Chris Paul this last year had basically his worst season ever. He played only 26.5 minutes ball game, 9 points, 7 assists, 1.2 steals. He was marginalized completely down the stretch. He once again had one of those month-and-a-half long absences right in the middle of the year with an injury. He finished at 104, which honestly, not that far off what Trey Jones did last year. But I would assume that Chris Paul comes in and assumes a similar role, but like a wiser version of Trey Jones. Trey Jones with the lower field goal percent, but a better basketball IQ. They want Chris Paul to help set up an offense on a moment-to-moment basis that gets the ball to Victor Wembanyama, gets the ball to Devin Vassell, and depending on who else may still be floating around for this team, gets it to those guys too at the right moment, in the right spot, in the pocket, in the shooting motion, whatever. And then some of these things Trey Jones did okay, but mostly the Spurs are looking for an upgraded version of that same player, which is a pass-first point guard. I don't think Chris Paul's body can handle 30 minutes a ball game this year, so drafting him on that assumption, I believe, would be unwise. But 25 to 27, somewhere in that neck of the woods, feels pretty damn attainable. Frankly, 28 is not completely out of the reach of Chris Paul, playing about 7 minutes a quarter. I think his body can handle that, and it might even hold up throughout the year. What does 27 to 28 minutes of Chris Paul mean on this ball club as opposed to what it meant last year in Golden State? The big difference between the Spurs and the Warriors is that on the Warriors, Chris Paul was not the primary initiator. When he was on the court, he was semi-primary initiator, but for the most part, that's Steph Curry's team. As it should be. He's better. I know Chris Paul averaged more assists and Draymond averaged more assists because he's actually the number 2 guy in initiating on that club when he wasn't suspended. And that's why Chris Paul's value was linked inextricably to Draymond's health / mental health. When Draymond missed time, Chris Paul had better basketball games. It was almost a 1-to-1 correlation there. It wasn't perfect because the Warriors went younger as the season went on, but They were legitimately, and I know Chris Paul led the team in assists this last year, but he wasn't the lead passer. Steph and Draymond. The offense has always been Steph and Draymond, and then everybody else finding their spot around them, with Klay Thompson getting sort of like the catbird seat on that for a very long time. But Chris Paul was, oh, Draymond's out. Okay, we need a different kind of initiating on this offense because we don't want Steph Curry handling the basketball every single time, and we no longer have the Draymond Green short roll. In San Antonio, Chris Paul's going to set up almost every damn possession. You'll see Vassell do it a little bit, and you'll see Trey Jones do it off the bench a little bit. But having Wemby do it himself is an awful idea. He had basically a 1-to-1 assist-to-turnover ratio. That's not high enough. Roll Chris Paul in here, and he could do the same thing Trey Jones did, but maybe even a little bit better. And it took Trey 30 minutes a game to get to 7 assists. I think Chris Paul can get 7 assists in 26 minutes of all game because he's going to be kicking it to these dudes. He's going to be running pick and rolls with Wemby constantly. They're going to run a dozen of them every freaking game, probably. I'm not kidding. I'm probably exaggerating a little bit, am I? I wouldn't look any farther than those guys, by the way. But if you're trying to figure out where the hell to draft Chris Paul, I don't think you're going to have to draft him inside the top 100. I don't think he's going that early. He had to be drafted like around 85 this last year, and ended up as a small disappointment, not like a team-breaking one. He was drafted as an early 8th rounder and finished as an early or a middle 9th rounder, so not exactly a steep drop-off. But if you get Chris Paul at 100, I think there's a really reasonable path to get him inside the top 100 this year. Maybe somewhere, and, hair splitting again, that's part of what doing fantasy podcasts is, I guess. But, difference between pick 80 and pick 100 is so incredibly small. But I think you could get Chris Paul up into the 80 range in an okay scenario. In a perfect world, the Spurs are just like, have at it, dude. Like, maybe he comes out this year and he's just reinvigorated by not being on a team, by back to being the general on his club. Maybe that reinvigorates Chris Paul and he plays 29 minutes a ball game. And suddenly you're talking about a dude that's pushing double-digit assists a ball game. Yeah, that's a pretty easy path inside the top 80. So for sure, I would look at Chris Paul beyond pick 90. I would prefer it to be farther than that. But I think you've got a relatively safe floor, at least until the very end of the season, depending on what the Spurs are looking like. They may pull the plug on him last 3 weeks, something like that. So end your leagues early, play in a games cap format, whatever. But I think you'll get something fairly useful out of Chris Paul this year. Not at all what it's been for many, many seasons. Chris was top 10 for a while, top 20, top 25. We're not in that universe anymore. But could he get to, 70 something? Probably. Just a quick reminder to everyone, because I think we're basically wrapping up the Western Conference right now, that because this is your classic double dip episode, those watching on YouTube, you can just sit straight through. We'll just roll from one team to the next. We're going to cover the Heat in just 30, 45 seconds or here from now. If you're listening after the fact, this is your reminder. Just stay subscribed, because in a couple of hours, the Heat part of this episode will then drop, and you can listen to the two chunks, in 2 sittings, 1 long sitting, whatever. And I think that's basically it for the San Antonio Spurs. The Wembanyama dilemma, which is, do I draft him first, second, or third? You've got Vassell, who's probably going to be relatively near his ADP. You've got Chris Paul, that I think could be an old man mini value, but of course his body could just fail. So again, you don't want to use preferably anything earlier than a 9th round pick on him. And then I don't think anybody else on this team really even comes close, which I made a joke in my tweet about today's podcast that we were going to be talking about Harrison Barnes. We're not going to be talking about Harrison Barnes, who, by the way, will probably have a role on this team because the team needed veteran leadership, but he's going to be out there, kicking and screaming and punching and trying to get 7-8 shots up or yank them away from Sohan and Keldon Johnson, whoever else is bouncing around, that you're going to be looking at it and you're going, yeah, glad I left all of that alone. The other team that we're covering today is the Miami Heat. So to those that are listening after the fact, welcome into the second half of our Wednesday double dip. The first half, of course, just completed for those that are watching live, but released earlier today on all channels, was the San Antonio Spurs. And as insane as it sounds, I'm probably... Well, no, you know what? I'm not going to make that sweeping claim on either of these teams. The Heat were, much like San Antonio, kind of an annoying team to deal with on the fantasy side. At least with the Spurs, you had two legitimate fantasy players last year. One transcendent all-world generational deal, one near ADP, and then for a little bit, second half of the year, for part of the second half of the year, you had a Trey Jones showing. Over on the Miami side, it was really just a mishmash of injured pieces. So first of all, just a quick re-welcome to the podcast. You're listening to Old Man Squad Fantasy Basketball. I am still your host, Dan Bespris. You can find me on Twitter at Dan Bespris and find the host podcast platform, my podcast platform, at Old Man Squad on social media. Please take a moment to like, rate, and subscribe to the podcast. That is what elevates us. That is what moves us forward, and we need your help with that. So please take a moment to like, rate, subscribe. Subscribing being probably the most important of the three. A rating on Spotify or Apple would actually be super cool of all of you guys. And then if you want to throw a like on the YouTube video, that would also be very friendly. The Miami Heat this last year gave us very few full strength data points. I'll say that again because it's sort of a weird sentence. The Heat gave us very few full strength data points. Terry Rozier, who they acquired partway through the year and then immediately had a neck issue, only played in 61 games all season long. Jimmy Butler only played in 60. And just to one up his buddies, Tyler Hero only played in 42. Better example of how this was a difficult thing to try to figure out for Miami is if you look at the last 2 months of the season, you got an okay number of games out of Butler and Rozier. Adebayo, as usual, played in most of his team's game over that stretch, but only 7 out of Tyler Hero down the stretch. So we didn't really ever get to truly see what the Miami Heat are when they had their 4 main scorers, or the guys that you could point to and say, yeah, those guys are going to play starters minutes. And then there's everybody else. Let's talk about those 4 guys, and then we'll try to see if there's anything else even worth exploring on Miami. Starting with Jimmy Butler. Jimmy Butler has been on and off of my various lists over the years. I would say more often on than off, with the sort of same usual caveat, which is he's almost definitely not going to play a full complement of minutes or a full complement of games. Minutes will be fine. Games will be the issue. And that was the case again for Butler this year, where he played in just 60 ball games. We went into a lot of detail on this on yesterday's show where I was talking about the top 12 because guys like Kawhi Leonard on a per game side, Joel Embiid, these are guys that are going to be in the top 12 per game. Same most likely with Kyrie Irving, but you just cannot find a year where they made it through a season. And for Butler now, I mean, we're looking at like 5-6 years running where he hasn't come close to playing in a full season of basketball games. Going backwards, reverse chronologically here on Jimmy Butler. This year, he missed 22. The year before, he missed 18. The year before that, he missed 25. Before that, 20. Before that, only 14. Season before that, 17. Season before that, 23. And his final year in Chicago, yeah, I know, we're going all the way back, past the Sixers, past the Wolves, all the way to the Bulls. He played in 76 out of 82 games. Although it's also worth noting that the 2-3 seasons before that, he only played in the 60s in games played. So Butler's never, save for 1 year, really, since he's been a full-time starter, made it through an NBA season unscathed. It just hasn't happened. And so to assume that it's magically going to happen this year, after he's already been an NBA player for 13, 14 seasons, is kind of foolish pie-in-the-sky optimism. And then you got to figure out how many games does Butler actually need to play for him to hit fantasy value. Typically, the answer is something in the low to mid 60s. But this year, his steals fell off so hard that he lost that early second round fantasy per game appeal, along with the fact that he now has 3 competent offensive teammates, so he didn't have to do quite as much there, even though Tyler Hero was out for half the year. So this may really be the first time in a long time that Jimmy Butler is not on my lists. But it will, as always, come down to where he's getting drafted. This past season, Butler was going in the 30s. I felt like that was a pretty easy yes on him. And it ended up not being that easy of a yes. Yes, he finished at number 27 on a per game basis, so he beat it there. But the assumption was that he was going to beat an ADP near 30 by like 15 to 20 slots on the per game side. And then it was going to be a question of whether or not he could get there by totals. But he didn't come close on the total side because the per game was relatively tight to the ADP. So Jimmy finished at number 54 by totals this year. And yes, a lot of that was one category, not disappearing, but losing like a third of his steals this year. It was a big deal. I do wonder, though, if Butler might fall into the late 30s this season, in which case I'd have really no choice but to draft him. I don't know where he's going to go. I think he probably goes early 30s, in which case, you're probably getting a per game win. So roto side, it could work. But you better not have anybody else in those top 2 or 3 rounds that also misses a lot of ball games, or you're going to be working on filling in a lot this year. And that is fine in moderation, but in overload, it's a bad idea. There's also this talk floating around that the Heat don't really want Butler around anymore, which I don't know. I mean, it seems like they probably should because he's wheeled them to things over the seasons, but is he going to hold up? How is his aging going to look? There's a lot of those types of questions kicking around right now. I think he'll probably have a pretty good season by all accounts. But the difference between 1.3 steals a game and 2 steals per game is significant. 40 to 50 steals on your roto ledger over the course of a season. We can also look at the second half of the year if you want maybe a little bit of a better feel on Butler. He was number 23 second half of the year with 1.5 steals per game instead of 1.3. Field goal percent was up to 52. Free throw was down at 83.5 over that stretch. But overall, numbers that you figure could probably be repeated, putting Butler firmly in that back end of the second round per game range. But again, that's not where you want to draft him. You want to leave some wiggle room in case he misses a lot of basketball games. Tyler Hero, the second half of this year, averaged 19 points, 5 boards, 4.5 assists, and 3 3-pointers a game. But over the second half of this season, he had like a grand total, I think, of 5 defensive stats. Now, admittedly, he missed like 3 weeks with injury in there. But the lowness, it's not even a relative lowness, like the overwhelming lack of defensive stats for Tyler Hero this year was alarming. Because even when he was healthy, and a lot of it was before Terry Rozier showed up, even then he was sitting at number 90 on 21 points, 3 threes, 5 boards, 4.5 assists, because there were basically no defensive stats. He was a train wreck field goal percent guy for your fantasy team, and that was enough to kind of sink him. So I don't think there's almost any chance that Tyler Hero drops far enough in drafts for me to take the plunge on him. If you're looking at a scoring guard on Miami, I think you're probably going to get a better value out of looking at Terry Rozier. I'm not saying that he's going to be great this season. I'm just saying you can probably draft him later than Hero, and you can probably get about the same fantasy lines out of him. You guys want to, listen to this. Terry Rozier, 19, this is over the entire season, not over his time with the Miami Heat. So maybe we should just look at basically the second half of the year. Second half of the season, Rozier 17 points, Hero 19. Rozier 2 threes, Hero 3. Rozier 4.3 rebounds, Hero 4.9. 4.7 to 4.6 in assists. Rozier 1 steal, Hero 0.2 steals. That was the big area of massive gain for Rozier. 86 and 87 were the two free throw percents for those two dudes. 43 and 44 were the field goal percents for those dudes. So they were like almost carbon copies of one another. But Rozier, a big jump in defensive stats, lower turnovers. And I'm thinking, although again, we can't really know this until leagues open up, which, by the way, friend of the program, Dan Titus, confirming that leagues are very likely to open 8 days from today. Woo! Woo! Oh, I can't wait. We're going to do a mock draft on the very first day because, like, how else would you celebrate? But I also want to talk about the pre-ranks because those will be coming out. Oh, it's going to be a good one. It's going to be a fun one late next week. I'm just realizing now that my kid is off camp, so he's going to have to sit quietly while I do all of that stuff. Sorry, 7-year-old son. It's time for solo play for like the whole day. Maybe he'll want to do a mock draft with me. Get Asher on it. I only bring this up. It's not that I think Terry Rozier is a better fantasy player than Tyler Hero or a better reality player than Tyler Hero. It's just that you're going to get almost the same stats out of those two dudes. And my guess is that Hero, you're probably going to have to draft near 80. And Rozier, you're probably going to be able to get outside the top 100. I wouldn't say that I'm specifically targeting either of those guys. But if Rozier is floating around after pick 100, I think he's worth a shot because we've seen the upside in his life before. And this team is always freaking hurt, whether it's Hero or Butler or both, or frankly, even Rozier himself. One of those guys goes down and suddenly he's got a lot of shots to play with. I mean, we were just talking about the second half of the year and what that meant, but you can also dig a little deeper and look at the last 2 months when Tyler Hero was out, most of them, and Rozier was a top 70 fantasy play during that stretch. Do I think Rozier's top 70 when the team's healthy? Nah, probably not. Probably more like top 110. But with that built-in upside, every time Butler misses a game, bingo, bango, you get to do more. When Hero misses a game, bango, you get to do more. It's all right there and waiting. Let's talk about one more stud on Miami, and that stud, of course, is Bam Adebayo, who has become remarkably consistent, really, in his fantasy numbers, right around top 50. Almost any way you slice it, he's right around top 50. He was number 49 for the entire season. Second half of the year, he was number 50. First half of the year, he was number 51. I know, wild. Down the stretch, he was like number 60, but there's also the kind of small sample size stuff there. But Bam, you can just etch in stone now. He's going to get you somewhere between 15 and 20 points. He's going to get you about 10 rebounds. He's going to get you between 3 and 4 assists. He's going to get you around 2 defensive stats. This year, he was at 2.1. 53.5 from the field, 72 at the foul line. Those are the numbers that you could see float around a little bit. And we have. He's had some good free throw shooting years. He's had some seasons where that's bounced back. He is beginning to add the three-pointer a little bit more, a wee bit, seeing it, frankly, more in Olympic play than you saw during his NBA stint. And the nice thing about Bam is that he shot his worst 2-point field goal percent since his rookie season this last year. So there is room for some kind of growth season over season. So he could be top 50, or maybe the 2-point percent comes back up a little, and maybe he ends up hitting half a 3-pointer per game instead of 0.2. But everything else is pretty repeatable for Bam, and you just kind of hope that maybe you catch a better foul shooting year, like a 78% Bam instead of a 75 or 76. But he's going to be a very safe fantasy play. He's most likely going to get drafted in the 40s would be my guess. Maybe he pushes as high as the 30s in some formats. I don't want him in the 30s. I think he went in the 30s last year, so it's not that crazy. I would draft Bam in the 40s. I think that's safe. I don't think he'll fall farther than that. And yes, I think there will be more exciting players we can draft in the 40s. But if those exciting dudes are off the board, you need a center. Adebayo is a really good one. He covers a lot of stuff without hurting you in too many places. There is value built into that dynamic. We had a guest on this podcast a couple weeks ago. I truly can't remember which one it was, but we got into a little bit of the Heat other guys scenario. And, they have Alec Burks now. They signed him. They brought back Haywood Highsmith. Obviously, Jaime Jaquez Jr. is the young guy they're excited about. Nikola Jovic, they're kind of excited about. And the fact that we can list off all these names, throw in Josh Richardson, throw in Duncan Robinson, and Kalel Ware, I think, was one of the rookies. You throw all those guys into the mix that are pretty much fighting for the remaining, call it like 15-ish minutes at each of the 4 starting spots. That's about 60 plus another 48, 110 minutes. It's too many guys, especially because you have to throw the backup center in there. So Thomas Bryant's going to get 8-9 minutes a ball game. Like, something's going to pull a few minutes out of this. The only real, I guess, obvious loss for the Heat in terms of guys who saw playing time last year was Caleb Martin. He was playing 28 minutes a game the second half of the year. He's gone now. Where do those go? Probably a lot of different dudes, although the big winner in the Caleb Martin's Gone Fest is Jaquez, who they love a lot. But even if you gave him 35 minutes a game right now, with the other dudes on that roster healthy and upright, his fantasy game just doesn't translate well enough. Second half of this year, Jaquez played in 36 of their 41 ball games, and he averaged 9.5 points, 3.7 boards, 2.5 assists, and a block on bad shooting. A lot is going to have to change to get Jaquez inside the top 100 this year. Like, multiple things. Fantasy game needs to be upgraded, so he's got to become a bit more aggressive on offense. You probably want to see more 3-pointers. Percentages have to get better, and someone's got to go down in front of him. Because even though he's going to get his 30-some-odd minutes, he's very much going to be the glue guy in that starting 5. When you consider the fact that Butler was 13 shots a game, 5 assists, and 7 free throws. Adebayo was 13 shots a game, 4 assists, and 4 free throws. Rozier was about 15 shots a game, maybe a little less than that in Miami, 5 assists, 2 free throws, and Tyler Hero was 16 shots a game the second half last year with 4.5 assists and 2 free throws. There's very little left over. Duncan Robinson was the 5th leading shooter on the team in attempts at 9.1, but a lot of that also came when Butler or Hero was down. When all 4 of those guys are in, which, might last us 5 games with the way the Heat tend to get hurt, there's not even close to enough fantasy value for someone else to climb into the mix. Plus, when you're looking at Jaquez, he's probably going to have to split some time. Nikola Jovic is going to see some action. He'll be the power forward, backup power forward, presumably. You might see Jaquez start, so that would give him a little bit of an edge. But if you want to get Duncan Robinson there, get some more shooting on the floor, there's going to be a mix and match thing going on that I think is going to keep almost all of these guys out of the top, call it top 130 or deeper, and probably deeper. I know that there's a pull, there's like an innate pull to want to grab a guy like Jaquez because he plays hard and he finds a way. Heat accounts are tweeting that he's the next Jimmy Butler. But here's the thing. Jimmy Butler shoots 7 percentage points better from the field this last year, 6 or 7 percentage points better at the free throw line. He's aggressive, gets to the line. They are not the same, and they won't be this coming season either. And at some point, maybe Butler does leave Miami. I think he's got this year and then a player option or something like that. And then maybe Jaquez slides into a bigger role at that point. But right now, all 4 of those main dudes are here. And by all accounts, should be starting the season healthy. So I just don't know where you find 10 or more shots for Jaime Jaquez. And even if you did, I don't know if that's enough. It's probably not. I don't think he's going to become a 5 or 6 rebound guy. Maybe more minutes could get him closer to 5, but he's not going to become a 5 assist guy. And full starters minutes, maybe you can get him to, 1.2, 1.3 steals. All the things, these are fine, but they're not going to move Jaquez from top 200 range to top 100 range. It's just too far to go without a dramatic shift in your actual role on the team, which doesn't appear to be in the cards right now. So just a quick recap on the Miami Heat half of our discussion. Jimmy Butler, I'd be looking to draft him outside of the top 30, preferably 35 range. Bam Adebayo, you're looking for him in the 40s. Again, preferably 50, but probably won't get that far. Tyler Hero, probably not drafting unless he gets moved. I think he'll be drafted inside the top 100, and I don't know that I want to do it there. Terry Rozier has a chance to be a value play. I don't think he's going to be like a guy who jumps into the top 40, top 50, but obviously if Hero or Butler goes down for a month or two, maybe that's where the upside is built in there. Rozier probably more like a top 115 guy when the team is healthy, and then more like a top 75 to top 90 range guy when someone goes down. That's a useful component to have on your fantasy team because, again, the price does dictate whether or not the player is worthwhile. Patrick in the chat room says, loving the new channel, Dan. Thank you for all the hard work putting these shows together. I tune in daily over the off season. I couldn't be more excited for the upcoming fantasy season. You and me both, Patrick. You and me both. If indeed August the 8th, happy Kobe Day, 8/8/24. That's a Kobe Day. Is the day that Yahoo Leagues drop. You can expect a ridiculous glut of goodies coming from yours truly. All kinds of things now right around the corner. The hope is that we can pretty much finish up our team previews between now and then. Although it occurs to me, and I want to give this warning again towards the end of the show, I'm out of town next Monday and next Tuesday. I might have a show set up to pre-drop on Monday if I can get my act together. If not, then there won't be. But the nice thing is it's the off season. I run everything myself now, so I make the choices on whether there's a show or not. And if there isn't one, too bad, because my family and I were taking a quick little road trip down from LA to San Diego, probably catching a Padres game while we're down there, probably doing the Legoland thing while we're down there. Should be a lot of fun, but I'm not going to have access to my recording equipment on Monday and Tuesday of next week. So here's the general plan if you're even remotely interested. Tomorrow, we will do 2 more teams from the Southeast. Friday, we will do 2 more teams from the Southeast. That will actually finish out 20 of 30 team previews. And that's where things get a little bit murky because if we come back on Wednesday and do 2 more team previews and leagues open on Thursday, that still leaves 8 teams uncovered after leagues are open. At that point, we may go to 2 very distinct shows per day, meaning one built on the fact that leagues are open. So mock drafts, draft analysis, all that kind of stuff, starting to look at what Yahoo's putting out, and a team preview show on the side. That's, to me, the play that maybe makes the most sense. Also possible that I'm able to record 1 or 2 extra prior to this weekend to drop over the weekend or into next week. But even if we did that, that would just take it from like 8 teams to cover after leagues open to 6. That doesn't really change the calculus all that much. So that's what's coming up here on Old Man Squad Fantasy Basketball as we wrap things up here on a lovely Wednesday. Thank you once again, everybody, for the comments, for watching, for liking, for subscribing. I am in debt to you all forever as we continue to grow this little thing that we've started. Just a little baby, 2.5 months old here. Old Man Squad Sports Network continues to grow. We've got more news shows coming here in the next couple of weeks. Very excited about those. And then a few more again as we approach the start of the basketball season. That's also very cool. If you want to be a part of the Old Man Squad, hit me up You don't have to be an old person or a man, frankly. It's just the way I build my fantasy teams, and it had a fun ring to it. Whatever you are, Beast is also welcome. Hit me up. We're always looking for more cool folks that want to come work with us here. Once again, cheers. I'm Dan Besbris at Dan Besbris on Twitter, at Old Man Squad. Like, rate, subscribe on the way out. We'll see you guys again tomorrow. So long for now.